Welcome back, guys. I'm going to show you the game played between Maxime Vachier-Lagrave and Magnus Carlsen from the final round of the Sinquefield Cup. It is a must-win game for Magnus if he hopes to catch Dingley Ren in the standings. Magnus had the black pieces here against MVL. MVL played e4 and Carlsen once again played his Sicilian defense with knight c6. And this was exactly the same as the game Carlsen had against Anand in the earlier rounds. In that game between Anand, Carlsen played bishop g7, but here Carlsen played c takes d4, which is a less common move with only 8 games in the database. So MVL played queen takes d4, f6 from Carlsen, knight f6 is also playable. Maxime castled d6 and c4. So here Magnus spent about 2 minutes before playing c5, forming a nice and solid pawn chain, and this locks the center and discourages any breaks from MVL, which is logical since Carlsen hasn't yet committed his king, so he wouldn't want the position to open up. Maxime retreated, queen d3, bishop g7, and MVL thought for 4 minutes before playing b3, and this is a novelty. So previously, knight c3 has been played in the game between Kovalev and Pragnananda in Vaikanse earlier this year. So b3 in a way tempting Carlsen to play f5. By no means is this a bad move, but it does make White's play more concrete. Here he can now play e5. And there is tension in the center. But Carlsen wanted none of that, and after 4.5 minutes of thought, he played knight h6. I think both players were out of their preparations at this stage. So knight c3 from MVL, rook b8, played after 12 minutes of thought. So what's the idea? For one, Carlsen is simply removing his rook from a vulnerable spot, in some cases with black castle. There could be some tactics with queen d5 check. But more importantly, Carlsen wants to eventually connect his rooks. He understood that there was no need to develop this bishop on c8. For example, if this bishop were to develop, say, to e6, then it could potentially be hit with a break like f4, f5. So it's fine where it is. The rook has the option of coming to b7, where it could potentially swing over to the king side when the opportunity arises. So Maxime played bishop d2, castles for Magnus, rook a to e1, so the plan is now clear for Maxime. He wants this f4 where he could potentially break with either e5 or f5. Knight f7 for Magnus, potentially wanting to jump into the square, and h4 from Maxime. So knight h4 is possible with the idea of continuing with f4, but after e6, f4, f5 kind of puts the brakes on White's expansion. So Maxime first played h4, trying to first loosen up the king side, and now this knight can come to h2, and the plan can continue. Rook b7 from Carlsen, so preparing to add more forces to the king side, h5, and g5. So a small victory for Maxime, forcing a compromise on the king side. But he lost some of that edge with the next move, knight h2. By no means is knight h2 a bad move, but better was knight e2 with the idea of bishop c3, preventing black from gaining the e5 square, before continuing on with the plan of knight h2. Note that black has nothing to gain with the immediate knight e5, simply knight takes e5, and black's structure is compromised with either capture. So in the game knight h2, Magnus now seizes the space left behind. Queen g3, king h8, stepping to safety and making room for the rook if the position opens up. And Maxime broke with f4, rook g8. So now if you capture, then the structure for black still remains solid. Black has the 2 bishops, nice control of the g file. This knight on h2 looks misplaced, and h5 seems kind of weak. While white does have the f-file, there are no good entry points for the rook. f7 can always be covered with bishop to e6. The only plus point for white is the d5 square for the knight, but overall black is doing better. So after rook g8, rook e3, MVL tries to continue on with his kingside play. Hopefully he will get the chance to swing his rook over to g3. Now Carlsen played the knight back to c6, threatening to trap the bishop with e5. If you play queen to h4, after e5, bishop g3, bishop h6, attacking the rook, and after, say, rook e to f3, then bishop g5 traps the queen. So in this position, Maxime played queen to f2. Now Magnus played f5. This further complicates the position. So on the surface, this appears to threaten bishop d4, although this was not Carlsen's real intention. Well, white can actually allow this bishop d4. E takes f5 is actually the best move, and surprisingly white is doing okay. I'll play through the variation. So here taking the rook would be a mistake, because white has this amazing resource in knight to e5, which attacks the knight and also threatens knight f7 check. So if that's taken, then here you can play h6. And if instead of taking, if black goes queen to e8 defending the knight, and after knight d5, black is incredibly vulnerable on this long diagonal. This bishop can also come to g5 to attack e7, and in the process opening up an attack on this bishop. White has great compensation here. So back to the game. Of course, it's very difficult to calculate such sharp variations over the board. MVL defended against the supposed threat of bishop d4 with knight to f3. But Carlsen was hoping for this, and now his real idea is about to unfold. He played bishop takes c3, very good move. So here the move you would expect is pawn takes e4. And Maxime was probably planning bishop h6, where black has to be extremely careful because of ideas like knight g5, knight f7 mate. And if the knight is captured, then tripling on the f-file looks great for Maxime. For some reason it's not showing. There it is. But instead of this, Magnus played the move e5, perhaps overlooked by Maxime. So the point is, if bishop h6, then f4 would trap the bishop. And if bishop back to d2, once again f4 stifles the attack on the king side. Maxime played rook d3. He is not giving up just yet, hoping to take advantage of black's absent dark square bishop after e takes f4, queen b2 check, h6, we have f takes e4, rook d2, e takes f3, h takes g7, rook takes f3. So what's the material count here? Magnus has 2 pieces and a pawn for the rook, so technically he is up about 2 pawns. In addition to that, he has this very nice d4 square for his knight, which will nicely shield the king on this long diagonal. So Magnus stands much better here. Magnus played queen g4. So if white captures on d6, then knight b4 followed by bishop b7, and f3 is simply crushing. Maxime tried rook d to f2. After knight d4, Carlsen's position is so good that it's just a matter of technique from the world champion. Rook takes f4 from Maxime, bishop f5, b4, a desperate attempt for a counterplay, but Magnus has everything under control. Bishop e6, simply protecting the back rank. Bishop g8, keeping the attacking potential of the rook and the queen. Queen b8 from Maxime, queen e3 from Magnus, and the threat is let's make a waiting move, say a4, knight e2, king h, let's say king to h1, and simply knight takes f1 with an easy win. So if king h2, then queen h6 is mate. If king f1, rook e7, and mate soon to follow. So, queen d6 played by Maxime, defending the checking square on h6 and allowing the king to step to h2 upon knight e2 check. Queen c1 check from Magnus, king h2, queen g5. The threat is now, once again, let's just make a waiting move. And here knight f3, winning the queen. Therefore, queen d5, this bishop is pinned. Magnus continues to poke at Maxime. And now queen e7, guarding any potential checks on e5 with the hopes of freeing up the rook to potentially join in the attack. Maxime played queen h5. And now queen e3 pinning the rook and also just controlling that h6 square. Queen h4, knight e2 check, king to h1. Now rook g6 with the idea of rook h6 doesn't quite work because of rook takes g8, and queen f6 forces a perpetual. And if we play in this position, king takes g8, then queen d8 check and queen f8 will be mate. So rook g6 doesn't quite work. Magnus played queen c1 check, and in this position white can no longer hold on. Rook f1 played. If king h2, then queen g1 and queen h1 mate. So rook f1, knight g3 check from Magnus, king to g1, queen to e3 check, and in this position Maxime Vachier-Lagrave resigned. So a possible continuation is king h2, then simply knight takes f1 wins. If rook 1 to f2, then queen e1, rook f1, knight e2, and queen takes h4 mate. And if rook 8 to f2, then rook g6 with the idea of rook to h6, and rook h1 mate is unstoppable. Impressive stuff from the world champion, who now ties Ding Liren for first place. There will be a tiebreak tomorrow to decide the winner. That's all for today's video. Hopefully I didn't bore you with all the variations towards the end. I really tried to keep it as simple as possible. And once again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, do consider subscribing for more chess videos. Thanks for watching.